going to now bring up some more disruptors in the space around influencer marketing, which is another fantastic area to start to look at what's happening in gathering up those influencers and leveraging them to get your message out. And how do we operationalize influencer marketing? So we're going to bring up David Shadpour from Social Native and Len Kendall from Havas, and they're going to talk to us about what they're doing that's new and very groovy in the influencer space. So let's have a hand for David and Len.
Thanks. Thank you. Hey, everybody. So we're going to throw up this slide here. It's a pretty interesting slide I found playing around on Google, and it blew my mind just a little bit because of the surrounding. So somebody looking on their phone, that's pretty common. Some of the people I'm looking at now are on their phone. But all the cattle in the background, that's uncommon. And the purpose of this slide is to be a little disruptive and have you think about mobile just a little bit differently. So location-based targeting, not as relevant to this guy. There's no 7-Eleven close by. Data targeting, not going to be a big aspect. So what is it about this individual that's going to speak to us as advertisers? So let's think of the evolution of visual content. By show of hands, how many people in this room have over 1,000 photos on their smartphone? So that's wildly different, right? There used to be a time where your dad was walking around with some huge device on his shoulder taking pictures of you on your birthday or a little video of you on your birthday. And now you can do that from a little pocket-sized device. So this year we're on target to make more than 1 trillion images. Let's look at the beginning. So in the beginning, you had to hold your head up straight. They even built a little device for you. You could buy on Amazon. You can't buy on Amazon as far as I know. But a little something that would hold your head in place to take a photo. So someone had to come to your home with this huge device and hold your head in place to take an image. And that kept evolving. This is my favorite photo in the slide.
Selfies.
This guy on the left not only has an awesome mustache, but he actually has a cigar in his mouth while he's holding the left-hand side of this camera. So two-man job to take a selfie back in the day. Now you can take a selfie with a stick or whatever that is. But let's talk about that evolution, right? So at one point, it was cameras strictly for the elite and folks that could afford it. And then it became, in the advertising world, an industry where we had a $100,000 camera, a photo shoot, lighting. You know, God knows how many lenses I've seen folks in photography bring with them, right? So that became a world that we grew up in where photography was really for folks that were doing it professionally. And then it became this, Coachella. There's a camera in every single person's hand. It's called a smartphone. There is one person in the back there who's holding an iPad. And props to him for not having a case. That's pretty wild, right? So there's a few things I saw in this image that spoke to me. One is, a lot of people are looking at their camera, not at the stage. Have you ever done that? So my kid's graduating first grade, and one of my goals is to make sure I watch, because last year I didn't watch. I kept looking through the camera lens, and I missed that experience. So that's just some interesting thought to think about when we're taking photos. The next question is, how did we go from a world where you needed some big device, and then you had to develop it and pick the photos, to a world where even an ape can take a selfie, right? And the answer is really mobile. Because of mobile, the way that we're educating the future generation is you can capture any moment at any time whenever you want. You can take thousands of photos. You can take 10 photos and pick the one you like best and post it on your Instagram. So everyone in this room has become a photographer, and we are educating our children to take photos of every moment. Hence, Barbie toys taking selfies. So what does this mean for us? As brand marketers, agencies, everyone in the ecosystem, how is this disruptive? How's the world changing? I'm going to pass over to Len, but the theme to think about is, how are we making everything visual? And how are we changing the way we communicate through images?
So I like to follow disruptive panels about VR with banner ads. David queued it up. Visuals are everything, and one thing that I think we on the creative agency side have to ask ourselves is why have we done things like this, and why do we continue to do things like this? And I think the honest truth is because we haven't kept up with our counterparts on the media buying side. Many of you in the room are from that discipline, and there are 1,000 ways and 1,000 different target segments that you give us as creatives the ability to hit. Yet we're still giving you 1 or 2 pieces of content to fill that spot. And things like this are very easy to change and augment, change the text, switch out the product shot, and it lets us pump out as much as we need to get to the right target. However, the reality is, of course, is that this isn't necessarily compelling. So if we want to sell Craftsman tools or their lawnmower series, we're going to have to share this with millions and millions of people for a very few of them to be compelled enough to go and buy it. Now, on the flip side, if we show them something like this, that's going to catch their eye. So one of our targets might be young dads. One of our targets might be Brooklyn hipsters who like to do DIY stuff and build things in their very tiny apartment. Another might be auto enthusiasts. We need to produce content that speaks very uniquely to lots of different people, and we don't necessarily have the bandwidth to create that much content. So, A, it needs to be beautiful, highly appealing, and B, it needs to be authentic and something that is going to resonate with folks. And so, how do we get all that content when we don't necessarily have the time to produce it all ourselves in-house?
So this slide is just a collage of content that we're making, and we wanted to open the floor to Lori and the audience to ask questions and try to push the limit in understanding how it is that we're creating authentic content at scale. So the vision here, real quick, is instead of one ad that appeals to millions, we want to be able to create thousands of images that speak to micro audiences.
So you are literally playing with this concept of influencer marketing. What does that mean to you, as an advertiser?
It's certainly a disruptive force because, we get paid to make content, and now there are all these people with hundreds of millions of, followers collectively who are producing amazing content and essentially competing for what we do as an agency. But what we've realized is, we need to fill lots and lots of spots with content. And instead of, cowering and saying, well, these folks are basically running us out of business, we're seeing them as a supplemental part of our business. They're an extension of our creative firepower. The equation 5 or 10 years ago was we find a celebrity, and then we find, and then we do a media buy, and we film the celebrity, we create, a 30-second spot or a short video, and we make sure that they get seen, across the world. Well, now we can go to these influencers, and they're basically doing both of those things for us. They have an audience, and they're creative forces as well that can actually work with us to produce something that appeals to their very specific audience. So it's a disruptive force, but in many ways it's empowering us as a creative business.
And how are you guys working together to operationalize finding those influencers and then giving them the power to do this?
Great. So on our end, we're focused heavily on targeting the right consumer. So our perspective in reaching, I heard a lot about millennials. How do you reach millennials? Through millennials. So our perspective on, as an example, targeting millennials is going to be find that kid in the class who's the most influential. Think about your buddy from high school or your girlfriend from college who's built out a small following for him or herself around beauty or auto or fashion or whatever it may be. They're that person you go to for advice when it comes to cars. They're that person you go to for advice around fashion or buying a new home or whatever decisions you might make. And so our technology is focused on capitalizing, finding those little micro influencers, and then aligning them with different brands.
Yeah, for us, this is particularly relevant. So at Havas, our mission, especially in Chicago, is invigorating great American brands through cultural relevance. So to sort of decode that, that's essentially working with brands that have been around for 50 or 100 years and connecting them with younger audiences. And the easiest way to do that is through influencers who are younger, who have credibility. And a couple of years ago, when we really got into influencer marketing, we started doing this ourselves. We would reach out to influencers, negotiate contracts, work with them to sort of art direct them and make sure that they represent the brand in a good way. And we still do that to some degree, but that's really hard to scale. And our bread and butter is making stuff. It's not necessarily purchasing sort of media in that sense. So we work with folks like David to not necessarily do that on a one-on-one basis, but scale that up so that we can access 250,000 influencers and content creators very quickly, and then really focus on the content they're producing and not so much on the sort of the logistics of making that happen.
So you log on to Social Native and you're able to identify, and so you're the creative shop, right?
Yep.
So creative shop is now logging on to your platform and managing that influencer marketing experience.
Exactly.
And we are very involved, with a lot of, media. We're not necessarily at the table a lot, but in this case, we're giving up a lot of we're giving up a lot of control, right? We're going to these folks who are out on Instagram, on Vine, and saying, do something interesting with our brand, and that's why we're involved, because we have to write the mini briefs, we have to curate the folks we want to work with. Because we're giving up control, we also need to watch it closely and be involved.
And why would an influencer want to participate? Is it because they love the brand and so they're happy to be to be contacted by your platform? And then they're like, oh, I've been identified, and they get excited, and they go out and do their thing? Or are you compensating them, or how does this work?
Yeah, so let's talk about perspective in the landscape. A lot of what you're going to see in the landscape around influencer marketing is celebrities or folks who have a lot of followers. And in my experience in a previous life, we hired an A-list celebrity to promote a brand, and she spelled the brand wrong. Right? So we spent $30,000 for a tweet, and her intern spelled the brand wrong.
Somebody got fired, right?
Yeah, that was...
He didn't get paid in the first place.
Right.
Could have been a challenge. So we've seen that in the market as a big challenge, where folks are doing things for the incentive. That's not how our firm operates. So incentives are super nominal, anywhere from $20 to $50, and are in exchange for ownership of the content. So we're not going out and offering people thousands of dollars to create content. We're going out and finding people who either love your brand or are excited around creating content on behalf of your brand, and that's why they're making really cool content. If you look at the pictures on the board there, some really cool content, and you can tell that the people who created it love what they're doing.
Is this something that your team took to right away, or was there a lot of training involved? Because I know when you're at a creative shop, folks aren't used to logging on to dashboards and doing this kind of work. Was it easy for them to jump in?
It was, and kudos to David for building a nice UX. I mean, it's you're right. I think especially on my side, we're not typically the ones that are logging into these types of platforms, but it really just comes down to seeing the feeds come through, seeing the content that's being produced, quickly picking which ones we want, which ones we don't, and then moving on to the next campaign. So it's very intuitive. And in terms of David's point about the influencers wanting to participate, it's absolutely true. Yes, they get paid, of course, but for them, it's kind of a personal branding exercise. They can say that Craftsman came to me and wanted to work with me on this content, and it gives them sort of a badge of honor, and we love to see that.
That's great. Do I have questions for these guys? Yes.
Where is it starting? Like, are you sharing current assets and guidelines, and walk us through like a business case of kind of how you start?
Yeah. So just to restate the question for anyone who didn't hear it, is sort of asking how do we start the relationship? How do we kind of go from end to end, from beginning of a campaign to the end of it? We generally will write a traditional brief that goes out to our creative teams, and they'll sort of do what they're going to do. But when we connect with David, it's a much simpler format. So we really need to push lawnmowers in the month of May. Here's some loose parameters that need to be sort of included in your photo or in your piece of content, and you have to, say X, Y, Z, and make sure you disclose that you're getting compensated in some clever way, or you can be boring and just say #ad. But it's pretty loose, and so the mini brief goes out to the various content creators. We start to get folks that are raising their hands and saying, I want to participate. We go through, we look at what is their influence, what's their engagement rate, who's creating content that resonates well with the content we're creating on a national scale in terms of our TV spots, and then essentially it starts to come through. Sometimes we just let the content live on the influencers' actual feeds. Sometimes we actually take stuff that people are making and then we repost it to our own branded channels, put paid promotion behind it, and it helps sort of fill in the content feeds. So, yes, we're creating our own stuff at Havas, but we're also taking the content that these folks have made and we're throwing it onto social as well to have a steady stream of day-to-day content that pushes our initiatives. And then we pay David, usually on time.
Another question?
I think social influence makes a lot of sense when you have a physical product that you're selling. How can it be applied in a space if you're advertising for a bank or a hospital or a university?
It's a great question. So in the early days, Len and I had that same question, and he gave me a bit of a challenge. So he asked me, and this is just a great joke that we have in shop. We talk about this all the time. He said, Dave, we want to promote do-it-yourself oil changing amongst millennial females. And I started
hyper-targeting.
So I started cracking up because I thought it was a joke, and I thought he was just messing with me. But I'll repeat it. Do-it-yourself oil changing amongst millennial females. So the first thing that we did on our end was try to figure out if we can think out of the box and come up with an idea that would meet that criteria. First, we segmented our auto list. We found all the women, and we reached out to them. We said, hey, we've got a challenge for you. We want to promote do-it-yourself oil changing amongst women. Do you have any ideas? And so one by the name of Kaylee, she took this photo of herself changing her oil. So the hood's popped open, and she's changing the oil. Cool image, but the caption was really awesome and creative. The caption read, I just pay my mechanic to take cute photos of me, girl power, with a little girl power emoji. And it was awesome. And it really resonated with her audience. And so my perspective on it was, you can buy a stock photo and say, hey, young women, you can change your own oil. Or you can create something really authentic that speaks to people in a seamless way. So regardless of what your brand is, you can think out of the box, and really we're crowdsourcing creative thinking for you. So folks who create awesome content are going to stick out, and folks who don't will fall to the bottom. And you can take that awesome content and amplify it, like Len said, on your own channels or on paid channels.
And just to sort of, get at the heart of your question, there's definitely industries where this is tough, right? Maybe if it's a bank or if it's some sort of service, you don't have a physical product, and typically the way we think about that is just tapping into events. So if they sponsor a sports team, if they have a presence at NASCAR, if they're at the Oscars, that's an amazing event where we can send influencers to the sort of, to cover it live and share content that way. It's not necessarily going to work all the time because obviously events aren't happening all the time, but that is sort of a workaround to tap into influencers and in a case where you don't necessarily have a physical product to take a photo of.
Len, is this coming out of the budget that you defined for the creative brief, or where is the budget coming from for this?
Yeah, it's something that we talk about a lot every day at Havas. I mean, generally, the media team and the creative team will approach influencer campaigns together. So, David might show up at our office and want to present his ideas to us, and we'll both be sitting at the table because we really have to be. Because a lot of times the budget is coming out of the media budget, but if we're not involved early on, this execution in the end isn't going to really turn out great. So there's no clear answer, but it's very much in the middle, and we try to collaborate as much as possible.
Are you saying that that's the case too with other clients, that you have to have media and creative in the room together?
So thus far, yes. It's usually the media team that's allocating the budget, but we always bring in the content and creative teams to participate. The vision is the industry will become smaller and smaller, so to speak, and we'll focus more and more on collaboration with every hat. Right? So the world of 2 different divisions and 2 different departments, just to speak a little bit to all the salespeople in the room, you've probably done a media buy for one of your clients and the creative wasn't good, and you're sitting there saying, no matter how good I am at targeting or whatever the value offering you have, the creative just isn't going to stick, and you can't really say that back to the client. And so we're trying to create an ecosystem where creative and media are collaborating on ensuring we're reaching, A, the right consumer, and B, in the right way.
Great. Any more questions?
There's one more over here.
Yep. Run, Jenny, run.
Len, what type of ROI did you see with the Craftsman campaign in terms of sales? How many traffic did you drive to the store?
I mean, I could just make it up and you couldn't prove me wrong, right? So they're an interesting beast. Craftsman's been around for a long time, and yes, ultimately they want to drive people either to the store or to the e-commerce platform. Because we did most of our influencer marketing on Instagram, We realized that driving traffic to an e-commerce site isn't necessarily going to work very well. Links don't, you can't really link out that easily on Instagram unless you put it in the bio. So in that case, it was really about encouraging shares and reshares and getting people to engage with some of the more vanity metrics like just likes and growing the followership. Craftsman's really interested in just growing their follower base, even though that's sort of a cardinal sin on platforms like Facebook. At least on Instagram, growing your subscriber base is still very important because every time you produce a great piece of content, you are engaging with folks. So it was really just a driver to the social platform to make sure that people are spending more time with us in social. Yeah.
To speak a little bit to KPIs, so I've seen everything from we just want to create content at scale to we want to drive social actions, and that's our metric. I haven't heard a lot of CPM, which is great, but I have heard folks who are trying to drive sales, and I can walk you through a few examples later of folks that have figured out how to drive sales off of Instagram. So it's really interesting. In my early days, I was a bit of a naysayer, and when I saw clients using the platform and generating ROI, it opened up my eyes.
Well, I think we've run out of time. Let's have a nice hand for David and Len for sharing.